All right. Thank you so much, Maria. It's a really pleasure presenting this sort of geospatial impact evaluation of highway using two country cases, Iraq and Morocco. So this is a joint work with my colleague, Rob Marty from DIME, and also Shitra, who actually recently graduated from Berkeley and has been doing a fantastic job to our team. So this work is also part of the iConnect program, which is a joint World Bank DIME and FCDO collaboration aiming at bringing more rigorous evidence into the transport sector. So how do we go about sort of evaluating the local economic impact of a highway in the setting where it's not always possible to actually design a customized survey for the impact evaluation? In the next 10 to 15 minutes, I'm going to discuss how in our two country cases, we managed to design a rigorous impact evaluation by relying on geospatial data because either it was not possible to use existing administrative data or design our own survey. The reason uh, being, for example, because of the fragility and the conflict situation of the country, that's the Iraq case, and also our inability actually to have access to administrative data to undertake a retrospective evaluation of two highway in the case of Morocco. Uh, as you all know, there's a natural sort of preoccupation when it comes to Iraq, looking at the domestic and political protests and the violence. And the country, as well as sort of the region, are dealing with a very difficult security situation, which actually limit researcher ability to actually work directly with the government counterpart on the ground. The direct consequence of that is that our data options are limited. How then can we sort of find an innovative way to use other sources of data to actually evaluate our transport investment? In these particular cases, we are using geospatial impact evaluation method, which is actually a method that rely on freely available satellite remote sensing data to evaluate the impact of a highway. This method provides an opportunity to actually evaluate rigorously our project by merging multiple sources of geospatial data with quasi-experimental method with the aim of evaluating the impact of the project. The idea behind the geospatial impact evaluation is actually to mimic the condition of an RCT without having to sort of randomly allocate our treatment and control group, but by using the precise geographic location and the timing of our relevant outcome. So to begin with, let me show you a quick correlation. Why are we using nighttime light, right? So this is actually to have a better understanding on whether satellite imagery are actually correlated with real economic variable. So what we did here is actually, we perform a basic statistical correlation analysis between nighttime light and the greater population. Here, we can see that the relationship is positive and significant. We also look at some LSMS data, meaning the revenue as well as the income, as well as sort of the expenditure of the household. So same here, we do have a positive relationship, and this actually suggests that nighttime light can be used as a good proxy for population and local economic indicators. And this result is actually very much consistent with the seminal paper by Henderson, Storegard, where we actually provide evidence that nighttime light can be used as a strong proxy for local economic development, and also an accurate measure of actually short-term and long-term growth at country level. So let me now discuss the two interventions here. So I'm going to start with the Iraq. Here, the government is planning to rehabilitate around 257 kilometers of the Southeast Corridor, and then also building a brand new corridor connecting the Turkish and the Syria border. So this is actually a new corridor using the Gishin and Soroyela intersection. So this is a greenfield project, so we expect to see higher sort of development impact. The model we are using is a simple panel framework with a lot of mount and pixel fixed effect, and the unit of intervention is actually all 750 meters square pixel that are actually falling within the 5, 10, or 20 kilometer buffer that we constructed around the road. So the first thing to do is actually to identify what is the road segment. So we identify the 23-kilometer road between Soleila and Gishen, and then we create buffer around that road segment, right? That allow us to create a monthly grid level panel data between 2012 and 2020. This is around 50K observation if you are at the 5-kilometer buffer, and more than 300K observation if you are moving at the 230 at the 20-kilometer buffer, right? So here we can see that we can actually go beyond the country boundary, but while designing or while constructing our grid level, we actually exclude all pixels outside of the country. So the sort of the two questions that usually drive the thinking when we are designing sort of this impact evaluation is that we are firstly interested in the amount of variation in nighttime light that we can measure, and that allows us actually to ask whether there's enough variation in the outcome across the study area to detect the change based on the location of our treatment. So in red, this is where we have our road and the 10-kilometer buffer. Since we are also interested in the observed change in the measure over time, so the second question we're going to ask is whether we have enough variation over time to actually detect substantive change that can be attributed to the treatment. The value per se of the nighttime measure of brightness are not particularly intuitive, right? So it's very important to actually make sure that we link that to in terms of relationship to each other. For example, by looking at the change as a percentage of a baseline value, or just looking at the difference in quartile. What we observe in this particular case is that between 2018 and 2020, there has been a change in the mean and the median value by quartile over time. And this change is actually observed both within each month as well as across all months in the data. That will allow us to actually detect meaningfully change in the area surrounding the highway. So our goal is really to use the timing and the location of the highway to actually examine the change in the different nighttime pixel and trying to attribute that to the new construction of the highway. So the treatment measure here is really whether or not the pixel receive the project, and then we employ, like I mentioned, a panel structure with monthly treatment and also outcome data for each of the 750 meters that are falling within either 5, 10, or 20-kilometer buffer. Our empirical strategy also control for the fact that in 2017, Iraq actually have seen the liberation from ISIS. So it's important to make sure that what we are capturing is not all the effort derived from that sort of liberation. Since it's also a greenfield project, that we thought it was important to actually control for environmental variable, like we use the normalized difference vegetation index, which is actually a good proxy of the density of green in the patch of land. So we believe our result is not actually contaminated or just capturing the effect of the 2017 recovery of the reconstruction of Iraq. So like Alice presented, this is like an event study where we can see from 2012 to 2020, the relationship had been negative and significant, but as soon as the country opened that new corridor connecting to the Turkish border and the Syrian, we see that the relationship changed. And even when adding the control for the environmental as well as the ISIS liberation, we still see a positive impact, right? And then these impacts are actually especially heterogeneous. When we move further away from the corridor, especially in the vicinity of 10 kilometers, we have the higher impact. But this is can actually explained by the fact that it was a green project, right? So around the corridor, there were actually trees and not that many activities. Later on, I'm going to show a context in Morocco, for example, where we do see that as we move away from the corridor, we have a lesser impact. There's also a possibility actually to use a different treatment measure by actually relying on travel time, right? So the idea, especially for the first 257 kilometers, is really, since it's road improvement, we don't expect to see that many change, but we can use actually the shock in travel time to make sure that we can construct a continuous measure to actually capture the change that can be attributed to the fact that either the government add a new lane or actually improve the road safety feature so that vehicle can actually speed along the corridor. So this is a work in progress. Let me now move to the Mexico cases. Here is really a quick request that comes from the cross support work I'm doing. So I received a request from our colleague in the GP that are actually working with the government of Morocco, trying to understand what are really the impact of this huge investment in highway in terms of local economic development as well as employment creation. Since we don't have access to Morocco administrative data, we thought it could have been a good idea to actually try to look at external validity of what we have been doing in Iraq. So what we did is actually trying to replicate the model and the method. The two highways of interest are the Kuriba Beni Mellal highway, spanning from the west to the east. It's around 95 kilometers. And then we have the El Dajida Safi highway, which is actually connecting the north and the south part of Morocco. The model is the same, but here we're going to emphasize on what if we exclude exit or échangeurs that are leading to biggest urban centers. The unit of intervention is the same, so we are using all pixels in the vicinity of the corridor. Again, same question that we are asking, do we see enough variation since the opening of these two corridors? And if yes, is it substantive enough to actually observe change due to the treatment? And the answer is yes for both highways. So we see that between 2015 and 2020, there have been a 38% increase in the average value of nighttime light for the El Dajija and Safi Expressway. Same, around 24% increase for the Kuriba and Beni Mellal highway. So then our role is actually to implement that sort of panel framework and see what is really happening. So what we can see from the table below is that the opening of these two corridors have been leading to an increase in the intensity of light in the vicinity of the corridor, and the magnitude of the coefficient is between 16 and 19%, which is actually very important. So here we do not have access to a lot of data to control, but this is something we can do. What we did actually is, I mean, the results are the same for either the Beni Mellal and Kuriga, but also El Dajija Safi, where the impact are a bit higher, so in the vicinity of 18 to 21%. So as can be seen, if we open corridor, it can actually lead to a change in the landscape of local economic activities. By just removing sort of the exit leading to bigger city, we can see that the effects are actually diminishing, but it's still positive and significant. Basically, we're going to use this sort of geospatial evaluation and complement by a qualitative survey that has been undertaken by the transport team in the vicinity of corridor by asking questions to firm and see whether there have been an improvement in their hiring and also in their access to the highway or the employee commute time. So this is really a nice complement to the existing data effort done by the GP colleagues. Just to conclude, I think the geospatial impact evaluation approach is a very well adapted method, especially in the data scarce and conflict affected setting. We do find positive and significant association between nighttime light and the event of building new highway, even after controlling for confounding factor as well as omitted variable. So this is really a rigorous and quick and also effective solution when we have like urgent demand, like in the case of Morocco for policymaker. And it's also a big potential for replication in various settings that is actually offering external validity sort of benefit. Thank you, and Maya, over to you.